Hi, my name's Steve Lott. I'm the State Event Supervisor for Roller Coaster. This video is being done so that supervisors at tournaments can try and all run the event the same way, so we don't have any problems where when kids get to state level, things were allowed at regionals that are not actually allowed. First up, the setup for the area for competition. What I like to do is I take painter's tape off a 50 by 50 centimeter square. That's the max dimensions for the device. It'll help with measurements later. You're going to need a meter stick or two. I bring a construction square, again for measurements, which I'll show in a few minutes. You want a couple rulers, metric rulers for measuring gaps. You need the official score sheets from soinc.org. I like to have target time written on the table where the kids set up. I do not post it so everyone can see. They get to see it when they come up to compete. So little flap here, they can have it. If you post it on a wall, kids who compete later, they may have an advantage over other teams because they can think about how they're going to change their device. I also like to have a separate timer easily visible on the table for kids. And this is what we're going to use to track their 8 minutes, so they can keep an eye on it as well as us give them reminders for it. Okay, when it comes to impound, impound is dependent on the area that you have to compete in, but I like to try and impound everything based on what their competition time slots are. So all the 9 o'clock ones we impound in one area, 10 o'clock, etc. They need to impound everything they're going to use, including the marble. The only exception, they don't need to impound their safety glass. Teams are ready to compete. I ask them to bring their coaster and all their accessories over from impound, and I like to have them place their device on the table right off the bat for measurements. Have them line up corners of their base with 2 of your corners. Now this base here is within the 50 by 50 square, but this is where having a construction square comes in handy because you have to measure the furthest out point in every dimension. So I take the square, find the furthest out point here, and then you can see that this is actually a couple centimeters too big. So this would be a construction violation. You need to check carefully on all sides. You may see cases where they have things sticking out here. You'd actually need to move this back from either square and do that. We're not actually going to put a box over their device. We're just going to use a square. You need to measure the height of their device. I recommend doing the height quite often. They'll have several different corners, measure all the corners to see which the highest dimension is. While you're doing this, you want to kind of just do a visual look for where their gaps are. Are they properly labeled? Do they have the start and finish line labeled properly? Just kind of do a visual look, but do not comment or critique their coasters at this point. The only thing you want to let them know is if they are oversized, if they're out of spec. So once that's done, I tell the kids, make sure they've seen the target time. I tell them they can run on the table or on the floor. Some kids are going to like to run the floor instead of the table. They'll feel it's more level. And then just give them a little introductory speech. I let them know that they're going to have 8 minutes to complete up to 2 runs, including their practice. Tell them they can watch their timer. We're going to keep track of their 8-minute timer for them. They can do as many practice runs as they'd like. When they're ready for a real run, they need to let us know. We'll pause their timer and until our timers are ready and actually time their run. They can make any adjustments that are permissible by the rules. And then at that point, ask them if they have any questions. If they don't have any questions, they can begin. When teams say they're ready for a scoreable run, what you should do is you should immediately pause their 8-minute timer, get your timers over, make sure everybody's ready. Inform the teams they're going to get a count of 3, 2, 1, go. On go, they should remove their pencil, and then you begin timing. It's good to make sure, again, that on the first run, this is resumed when their run starts because this is part of their 8 minutes, the first run. Okay, the moment their first run is over, and again, time stops when either the ball leaves the device, when it crosses the finish line, or else if the ball stops and does not restart within 3 seconds. So at that point, you do need to stop the timers after 3 seconds has passed. So at that point, you're going to record the middle of the 3 times, rounding down to the nearest second. On the score sheet, you should also note which gaps were successful. If there were any, you don't have to measure them now, but just make a note. Yes, they made the gap. No, they didn't make the gap. We'll do measurements later. And again, do not give them any feedback if you saw them doing things that are wrong. You just say, okay, you have 3 minutes, 4 minutes left to practice and do your second run. Let us know when you're ready, and then you can start their time again. Okay, once their second run is over, you want to record the middle of the 3 times again, and then if they did gaps, it's time to measure gaps. I asked the kids to put their coaster back up on the table. Now, some things about gaps here. In order for the gap to be a real gap, the rules say that it must be clearly labeled with both the start and finish of the gap labeled. So this example here counts as a real gap. It says gap. I have the start labeled, the finish labeled. If they just write the word gap up here, it doesn't count. If they don't have it there, it doesn't count. If they just draw lines, it doesn't count. They need to have it labeled like it says in the rules. To measure this one, again, regardless of where the ball lands, where it leaves from, you measure from the end of the first part of the track to the start of the next track. And you round down to the nearest whole centimeter. It is horizontal distance. If the gap drops off, you don't measure an angle, you still measure horizontal distance. This particular gap that I set up is about 7.4 centimeters. We would record 7 centimeters as the distance. A lot of kids will have things that they think are gaps that are not. So as a couple examples, the ball just going and hopping off a piece of track and landing somewhere else on it over here is not a gap. This piece of track is continuous beneath it. This down here is also not a gap where the ball drops off here, comes off here, drops off again. In order to be a gap, it has to leave track, be going through the air, and land on a new piece of track with at least a 5 centimeter distance. Also with gaps, one important thing is the landing of the gap. So this is just a little sample of a landing. The ball would have to come and actually hit on this track here and be able to roll in. If the ball hits this wall, hits this wall, hits the back wall, that gap does not count, even if it's labeled. So again, that's why you need to have someone very carefully watching all of the gaps throughout the course of it, because while gaps may be there, they don't work sometimes. Okay, a couple other things to watch for when the runs are happening, during the practice runs are real, especially with the start lines. The rules say a start line has to be drawn perpendicular to the direction of travel. So for our purposes, the ball's going this way. This counts as a start line perpendicular to the direction of travel. What you need to watch for is it says the pencil must be placed on the start line and the ball completely behind the start line. So there, the pencil's on it. If the ball's over here, that's fine. But you'll see teams where they start back here, they start here. Those all count as a violation for that run. This also would count as a start line, and that's fine. They would put the pencil on the line this way, the ball behind it, it's fine. Just having the word start written somewhere does not count. Having the word start with an arrow does not count. You need to have a line perpendicular direction of travel. Also related to the start, it says the pencil must be held in the participant's hand only. So they can't have this type of setup, which we saw last year as well, where the pencil goes through holes and the ball just sits behind it, they pull the pencil out. It has to be held in their hand on the start line. Lastly, quite a few teams use this style of roller coaster where the ball is just a sloped ramp, goes back and forth, back and forth. It's fine to use that, but unlike last year, they can't just impound it and then come out to compete and put blocks under it. Because by doing that, they're changing the height of their coaster after impound, which is a violation. They're also changing the position of the start and finish lines. Start line was down here, now it's up here. Finish line was down, now that's also being raised. So there's multiple violations for doing that. They need to impound them in the ready to run position. Okay, once everything is done, you've recorded the information. I like to call the kids over and just go over the score sheet with them, let them know if they were put in tier 2 for any violations, and point out things they did good too, and then have them, one of them or both, initial the bottom of the sheet just showing that you went over the scores with them so there's no surprises for them.